Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach and welcome back. It's good to get those previews underway as we embark on the 2017 AFL and of course SuperCoach season. Now I was looking at a few previews and I was starting off with Adelaide as I do with my alphabetical order. Then I was looking at Essendon, a few prices came out and I thought let's kick it off with the Bombers. I think there's so much to discuss about them. I mean, not necessarily by number of players but just the whole concept of selecting Bombers and the 10% discount on their prices, and I just think it's really interesting. So I thought since it was pretty fresh, they've got the number one pick, their prices just came out, I thought it'd be interesting to kick off with them and discuss a few of the more notable players. Of course, in these previews, if you haven't tuned in before, I don't always discuss your obvious Pendleburys and Dangerfields and things like that. Not always your drafties. I will do some top ones, as you'll see in this podcast. But generally, it's guys that should be on our radar. Discussion, it's early in December. I mean, we're not looking too deep as far as pinpoint exact positions, but it's good to have a bit of discussion and just general SuperCoach banter. So I'm going to start us off with Jobe Watson. I think, as a man being talked about more in recent time, I'm not too sure. I mean, as far as football blokes who don't roll in week to week, he has continually been talked about, so much controversy surrounding him. Now, do you pick him in 2017? I mean, that's the only question we really want to talk about at the moment. He'll be priced pretty well, $453,000. I mean, we look at Jobe Watson, we look at his numbers, what he's done in the past, very tempting, understandably so, but my final call on Jobe is quite a simple one. It's a straight up no, and I'll tell you why. First off, I'll tell you his numbers since 2012, that infamous Brownlow medal, which is no longer, averaged 121, 111.5 in 2013, 106.9 and 92.6 in 2015. Now, I think Jobe, to put it quite simply, is cooked. I think he's 32 years old. He may still look ripped as all hell on the training track, but I question his ability for his body to actually hold up throughout a season and maybe over just a month or two at AFL level. The question has to be raised. I mean, yes, he's priced very well. Yes, he's probably their best midfielder in the team. You could definitely mount a case that he's not anymore, but he has the runs on the board. He ticks the box that we know what we're going to get as far as his playing ability. He'll win it in and under, dish it out, be very reliable, but I just think there's enormous question marks over his body. There were 18 months ago. I mean, 2014, he missed 10 weeks with a hip injury. 2015, season was ended, I think after 12 games I think it was round 14 potentially, ruled out with a shoulder injury for the rest of the year, and he was only averaging around the 90 mark at that stage. So 92.6, yes, they had a lot in their mind. He was carrying a big weight at that point in time, but it wasn't though he was absolutely tearing the house down. We could even mount that case for 2014, 106.9. That's nice, but it's a long time ago now. He hasn't been able to train as he would have liked. I mean, they've had the year off. He's obviously been training, but you can't have that match fitness. You just can't. And I think the overriding point is the mental strain. There's still articles and discussion on radio about whether he's actually still interested in playing the game. A bit of a body blow with the Brownlow getting taken off him. So much query over will he even line up. So I think all that cloud over him. Yes, it's a nice price tag, but no, I don't think we should select him. I think it's a pretty simple one. I think it's very risky. And before I move on to all the other Bombers, as far as guys who, didn't play last year and were ruled out as part of the, big drug saga there, I think it's just as a broad overview, the message is tread with caution, I think. So, I think it's extremely risky to pick him. I think there will be players that we do, but don't just look at their price tag and immediately think what we've seen them do. You got to think about the time they've missed, the mental strain, the absolute changeover of players. There's going to be just a whole bunch of guys mashed together that haven't played much footy together. There seems to be this train of thought that the Bombers will push for the 8. Alright, they might, but I'm calling that a myth, to be honest. I mean, has the top 10, 11, 12 spots on the ladder ever been so competitive? And we think just because they get back a bunch of players, and you could probably argue only 4 or 5 are genuine quality players, then they think they're going to push for the 8. I'm not too sure about that. I think it's far different mindset to what they had last year. Yes, they did well last year, but they had nothing to lose. You know, they basically, if they got within 90 points, it was going to be a win deemed by most people. And I think next year, it's one thing to do it with that. It's another thing playing good footy with the weight of expectation and scrutiny. Just ask the Richmond Football Club. They know all about it. Promise, promise, promise. When the heat comes, expectation, they wilt. I don't think the Bombers will totally wilt, but I couldn't see them pushing seriously for the 8. But I could be wrong. So we'll move on to Andrew McGrath, of course, the number 1 pick. Much talked about those probably top 3 positions, but for much of the time it was Hugh McCluggage, Andrew McGrath. It ended up being him, an explosive type player. Played a lot off the half-back line, but the Bombers have openly said that they see him as a real midfield prospect. Now, of course, Wiedering last year was priced at $220,000. We know he was a pretty successful pick until he got injured. McGrath will be able to be picked as a midfielder and a defender, which I think makes him one to really consider. Yes, it's a bit of a price tag at $220, and yes, there's a fair bit of water to go under the bridge as far as pre-season and him obviously, really cementing himself. But I think, it's hard to really look at our rookie price spots, but I think he's a guy you really got to look at. $220,000. Historically, Shorty doesn't really like paying that much money for guys who haven't played a game before, but he could be an exception. I mean, we know how good the TAC Cup is now. It's more and more common to see guys come from under 18s and have an immediate impact, which used to be unheard of. So I think a lot is to be done for McGrath to really be a feature in our sides, but he's certainly one you should have at the forefront of your mind when looking at the Bombers. Speaking of guys who've come out of the TAC Cup, delivered immediate impact, is this man, Dyson Heppell, and one you should also be considering. $513,000, and you pretty much know everything about him. I mean, burst on the scene. He's averaged 80-something, 83, 85, I think. Then 2014, 106.1, 2015, 104.8. Now, they were his 4th and 5th seasons. Fantastic effort. He's been much talked about as a future captain, rightly so. We all know him. He's class, good user, he's poised, happy Naka find the ball, will have developed to win more inside ball with, obviously more weights and developing as a man. So I think he ticks all the boxes there. He's priced at an average of about 95, so, he probably, that's 9-10 points less than what he delivered in 2015. But they hand out that discount for a reason. There's obvious risk associated. Pretty much everything I said with Watson in regards to the training. I mean, Heppell's body will stand up, but it is another thing, to just forge into the midfield that is largely unknown to playing with one another. And look, I think Heppell's a reasonable option. I won't be going with him unless he sets it absolutely on fire in pre-season. I think it's just far too risky. There's a lot of good options as far as our elite midfielders go. There's a lot of guys, alright, not around 5'13", but there are your likes of Dane Beams and things like that that I think we should look at. So I'm not, you're probably getting the vibe, I'm not a massive rat for picking Bombers that have had a year off, especially when we got a stack of other guys to choose from. Now, when you pick Heppell at 513, you pretty much want 108 plus, maybe 110. So I think he's a guy that you pick him, you want him to be in your team the whole year. The question you've got to ask yourself, is he going to be one of the top 12 midfielders for the whole year? And I think, you got to question that. So we'll see how he goes. Watch his pre-season. I'm a bit wary. Zach Merritt. Now, he's going to be priced at $594,000. He comes at a real price tag after what was an unbelievable season last year. Averaged 111.5. And I'll put my hand up. I got it wrong there. I mean, I definitely didn't think he could keep that up. I pretty much tarred Zaharakis and Merritt with a similar brush. They'll have very good games at times, but when the heat comes and the Bombers tire, their scores will represent that. Zaharakis did so. Merritt did not. He went from strength to strength, scored 140 odd in the last round. An unbelievable season from what is surely one of the next bright stars for our game. I think he's still only about 21. So he scored regular hundreds. I mean, he scored 53 and 74 as his 2 lowest scores. The rest were 90 plus. I think he broke the ton I can't remember how many times I had to look at it. It was a lot, as you could imagine. Showed his ability to go big, kept finding the ball, a good user and a hard tackler. But again, am I going to go with him? The big question is, he's no longer dual position. He loses that forward, as you would expect. He played all midfield, so he is a pure mid. And unfortunately, Zach, that rules you out of my calculations. And I know what you're thinking. Shorty, just admit you're wrong. Just suck it up and just pick the bloke. Well, no, I don't think I will. As I said with Heppel, there's a lot of guys out there that are fantastic options in our midfield. Merritt, you're paying top dollar at 111.5 average price. He's pushing the 600k mark, and he's had one good year. The fact that Watson and Heppel return, it will help him at times, but surely I think a lot of his good scores were built around the fact that he was always at the heart of the pack. He attended a lot of centre bounces. He was always there, which allowed him to have huge tackle numbers, get a lot of the ball. He had a lot of young guys around him that viewed him as more of a leader, which he's more of a focus around the contest as far as dishing out and winning the ball. Now, we will go down that pecking order. I'm not doubting him as being a future superstar, but as far as picking him for our midfield, he would definitely have to hold those numbers. And I'm not saying he won't. I just think he'll probably drift down to maybe around 100 to 105, probably close to 105. But there's a lot of unknown. And in SuperCoach, I'm not a big fan of taking too many risks. And I think you'd put him in that side, your side, for that price tag, with so much unknown about the Bombers midfield, their performance, his ability to carry on that form. Huge risk when you're paying that sort of dosh. Massive risk. Just my opinion. I'll be interested to hear yours. A couple of guys to finish on. Michael Hurley had an outstanding season 2015. It was Alex Rance-like, really, just rebounding off the back line, taking intercept marks, and just genuinely beating the best forwards in the comp. 16 games, he went 18 plus of his 19, 9 tons in that, so he ticks the box for consistency, and he's a guy I'd think about. I mean, 464,000, you don't want to have too many key defenders in your back line. I've normally gone with none, but Alex Rance is looking like almost a must-have, I think. I'll talk more about him down the track. Michael Hurley is probably the next best thing as far as that, and he's priced quite nicely. So he's one you'd think about, but again, just focus in as pre-season comes around. Have a look at how Cale Hooker and Hartley and things are lining up. How much is he going to be taking the absolute key forward? Will he get a bit of a license to use his hard running off the back line and ability to intercept? His role will be important, but at 464,000, he's certainly one to just have in the back of mind and think about. Just finally, a couple of young fellas. Well, not a young fella, but sort of lower on the price scale. David Myers, not young, 27. Is he in the best 22? Maybe. Is he priced well? Yes. He's priced at 133,000. Only the 2 games in 2015. He was sidelined with a shoulder injury. So again, test his body out, see how he's coming along through the pre-season. I think if he does have a good pre-season, finds his way into the Bombers lineup at 133,000 to get a guy who's a solid role player. I think as a Bombers fan, I'd imagine that you'd really like seeing Myers out there, a guy who, okay, he's a top pick and maybe hasn't come on, but I think players and fans have grown to accept what Myers is about and like him as an honest footballer. And I think at 133,000, honest football is going to make us a fair bit of cash. So one to definitely think about. Aaron Francis, he'll be priced around the 220,000, I think, after playing some games later in the year. He played 3 games, averaged 59.7 with a high score of 86. I wouldn't really be thinking about him, I don't think. You can get him as a backman or a forward. Now, of course, we've just discussed Andrew McGrath, who'll probably be around a similar price. You'd probably have to slightly go more towards McGrath. I mean, Francis is a top pick of last year, had a bit of injury, showed a lot of promise, I should say. I mean, he had a fantastic glimpses in the 2s. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely one to think about. You got to be careful of having too many guys priced around that 200,000. I would only go a minimal few that really stand out for your whole team, let alone both in the back line. So Francis would have to explode through the midfield, and you have to see where he's developing. Well, not through the midfield, sorry, through the pre-season, but he has been talked about as a potential tall mid. I don't think we'll see that at this stage of his career, but he's one to think about. Plenty of talent. It's always good to look at last couple of years, top 10, top 20 picks, so who hasn't really got that chance to fulfill their potential yet, and maybe this is their year. Francis slightly goes into that category, and he's reasonably priced if you're a Francis fan, but see how his pre-season goes. Anyway, that's enough about the Bombers. We talked plenty about it. There's a lot to talk about the Bombers, not necessarily exact players, and I couldn't honestly see a stack of them being in my side unless a few rookie players come around. But I think there's a lot to discuss. Some people, it might be what wins you 50k if you take a risk on one of these guys and it pays off. It could be what loses me 50,000, who knows? But nonetheless, I think they're worth discussing, and the reason I kicked off the previews with them is because I think it's got a fair bit of debate to go about. I think a lot of people will probably differ in their opinion on individual players and perhaps the Essendon thought process on selection in general. But I guess it's hard to really preview them at December when you've got so many blokes coming from out of the game, coming into a side that, did beyond expectation last year. Who stays, who goes, how many players will keep prominent roles in the midfield and things like that. So it'll be interesting to keep track. No one more than this club you really need to watch through the pre-season. They are the number one, really, because if you want to see if these guys are of good value and if some of their young guns are going to play and where, then they are definitely an unknown quantity and one you'd want to watch closely. So thanks for tuning in. I'll have a look at the Crows next. As always, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'll have plenty of SuperCoach content coming your way throughout the season and, of course, pre-season. Give the video a like, comment. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the Bombers and who you're picking. If you agree with what I say, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, don't necessarily give it a thumbs down, but certainly let me know in the comments why you don't disagree, and I'll always look to have a bit of a chat and discuss all things SuperCoach. So stay tuned, guys. We'll have a look at the Crows next.